Everybody knows that informational interviews are critical in your job search as well as your career development, especially now in today's environment with the global pandemic making hiring very difficult now. It is very, very important to get your informational interviews handled. Today's video is actually on the common questions that I get from a lot of my students about how to conduct informational interviews and my answers into a lot of these common questions. So if you're having problems with your informational interview, this is the video for you. Hey, this is Michael with Michael's Business English. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Rincon. I'm a former six-figure data analyst turned ESL instructor and career coach, and I support English language learners improve their career development through communications and language training. Okay, so this is actually part two of my informational interviews Q&A video. The first video went on too long, so I made a second video to cover some additional questions. So another question that I've gotten from students has been, why is it that I'm constantly getting different feedback on my CV or my resume? So for example, one student I spoke to, his name was Ganesh, he told me that he would ask people for feedback and get all sorts of different answers. And then just to cut to the chase right here, the reality is that 99% of people you talk to don't know what makes a good resume or CV. I'm just being honest, right? Like it's not like someone just because they got a job doesn't mean they know what it takes to get that job. A lot of people who get jobs are getting lucky. Let's just be honest. Most of the time they counted on their network and that's what drove them in. So they may not even have a good CV. It just may have been that they have a powerful referral. They may have had someone who was so like tight with their boss that it was very simple. So as an example for one of my friends, he got a job. He's actually, it's funny. He's a master's in psychology, and we were talking like, how did he end up in mortgage? And he told me one day he was at a bar with his friend, and his friend turned to him and goes, "Hey, do you need a job?" And my friend goes, "Yeah." And that's how I got the job. It had nothing to do with his CV, nothing to do with his resume, none of that. It was just he just happened to be in the right place in the right time. Although one of the challenges with that is that you see like he got a job that's not aligned with his career. He's a master's in psychology. What is he doing in a mortgage company? Right? Like, so just stuff to think about. Like that's why if you do informational interviews, like do not expect to get consistent answers per se, because the reality is that you don't know what they're going to say until it's too late. An example for me, uh, let me back up. When I say too late, what I mean is like until you actually have the interview. So I'll give you an example for me. Um, this is what actually caused me to stop pursuing my career as an analyst and caused me to jump ship and become an English teacher. I had an informational interview with a former chief risk officer, chief financial officer, who's now a multi six-figure consultant for a boutique consulting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Very cool job, very nice. And we did the informational interview. I spoke with him, and he looked at my resume. He told me this: you need to stay in a job for 2 years, and you need to get a advanced degree. So something else that also came up, like not just with him, but this is a pattern that came up with a few other like executives. So I spoke to a vice president of analytics who was a friend of my dad, and we spoke, and she said something that shocked me as well. Like you have to stay in a job for at least a year. Yet the reason I'm telling you this stuff, the reason I was shocked, the reason it surprised me, is that if you go through my resume, if you go through it line by line, you'll notice one, I've never stayed in a job for more than 2 years, ever. I've stayed in most jobs for less than a year or a year and some change. And I've never felt the need to get advanced credentials. There's never been a benefit to it, which I could be wrong, but what it showed me was like the time effort that would take is like, first of all, I'm talking to the wrong guys because the managers who I want to work with are not going to be, what's it called, set in stone. Like it felt like I was talking to a brochure. You know what I mean? Like these are people who are doing okay, but first of all, both of them had like advanced credentials. That was part of the problem that I realized was that I was talking to people who didn't have a non-traditional career path like myself. They're kind of like they followed the traditional career path and that's what they did what they were told. And they're not used to talking to someone who had a non-traditional career path who went from $30,000 to six figures despite not having the advanced credentials. So that's something that I realized with I was talking to the wrong people. Right? I was talking to an audience that's very focused on the wrong things like credentials. That's just an important thing to keep in mind. The other thing I've learned is that some people, especially when it comes to informational interview, they only know what worked for them. Okay. In fact, what's even worse, I'll tell you this. So one of the people I spoke to, she told me you have to stay in a job for a year, and then I actually ended up working on her team. And what happened was somewhere along the way, she got a promotion, and then not long after that, she left that team to take another job. So I'm kind of curious, like, why would you say it takes a year to master a job, then you leave in less than a year? And what I've learned is that most people will tell you what they think is the correct answer, but they will do what works for them. And that's just how it is. And it's not that they're lying, it's just that in the moment, that's what comes to mind. So if you were to ask me, like right now, like, Michael, what are you supposed to do? I would say networking. But if I actually look at my activities, I would say if you were job searching right now, if you looked at my activities, I didn't do a lot of networking. I focused on my LinkedIn profile and I focused on applying for jobs. And what happened was I get recruiters approaching me because they found my profile on LinkedIn, and or I would apply for jobs online and people would respond to that. People would send me an interview request because I applied for a job online, which is it's contrary and it's counterintuitive. It's not what I normally teach, which is weird. Why would I suggest that? Right? So it's important to think about that because sometimes people will say for you to do something, but they're actually doing something different. In fact, what's interesting is I'm going back through 2 hour job search in preparation for this video, and Steve Doughton noticed the same things. That sometimes if depending on when you ask questions and how you ask questions, they'll give you generic advice. So imagine if like you're trying to get better dating, what's the common thing people tell you? Just be yourself. Just be yourself. Like I heard that for 10 plus years. Whenever I would ask a girl, a female friend of mine, like, why am I having problems with dating? They would say, just be yourself. And that never worked out very well, right? Like that's because the way I was not attractive. Same thing's true with the job search. The reality is they're going to give you advice that's like the politically correct advice. It's very rare for someone to actually give you like the actual data you need. In fact, another caveat, like this probably a different question, but it's similar to the same question, is like, why do people keep giving me different advice? I had another student recently. She was asking me, like, she told me I was the first person to actually tell her that her resume was awkward. Like, she told me she wanted to be a project manager, but I looked at her resume and said, I see data analyst. And that's something I've noticed. A lot of people don't have what I would say a clear, unbiased mindset. Like most people, when looking at their resume, it looks fine, it looks great, everything's okay. They don't know, like they can't think like a recruiter can. They can't think like a hiring manager can. That's an important thing to be aware of. Like most of the time, they're just kind of walking in, like, I don't know, man, this is fine, right? Like if you ever tried like getting advice from someone, you may have noticed like their advice is just okay. It's because they don't have the expertise, they don't have the knowledge, they're not thinking. So just keep that in mind. If you've ever been having challenges with your job search, why is it that when you do informational interviews, you're not getting consistent answers? It's a very good chance that you're talking to the wrong people. It's a good chance that you're talking to people who just don't know. There's also a chance that you're talking to people who they just don't. They're just bad. Trying to think if there's anything else I can add before I end this question. One other thing I would tell you I noticed is that the other thing to keep in mind is that going back to who you talk to in an interview is that everyone does things differently. So one of the first informational interviews I did was with a 20-year-old. This girl was a little bit younger than I was, and she was making more money than I was. And I approached her and I said, hey, you know what? I noticed you're making more money. What's the secret? And a few things that came up that I noticed. She didn't apply for the job traditionally. She got the job through a referral. The other thing I noticed was that the way she talked about the job, right? Like she didn't talk like a job seeker would talk. She talked like a consultant would talk. And that's an important mindset shift that I had, which is to stop trying to be a job seeker and instead start being a consultant, be a service provider. So keep that in mind. So again, when you're talking to people, just be aware of who you're talking to. Okay, so I was trying to think if there's anything else I can add for this question. The other thing I would suggest is you keep notes, pay attention to what's going on. and how people are responding. The only other thing I would suggest is be careful like what you're talking about in an informational interview, because it again, if you one thing I've seen people do is they ask for like a referral like within the first uh, 30 seconds, and if they don't know you, they're not going to be inclined to do it. Likewise, or rather on the contrary, if they like you, they will automatically refer you. They will automatically go to your boss and go to their boss and say, hey, I want to bring this guy in. You won't even have to ask for it in some cases. So just keep that in mind. Think about like your performance overall in an informational interview. That could be part of the reason why you're not getting referrals. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this was helpful for you. Please leave a comment below letting me know what you learned from this, what questions you still have. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. If you haven't signed up to my email list, make sure you do. I'm sending out emails daily now with helpful career development content, strategies you can use right now that you can use immediately to help you with your job search and your career development. All right, thanks so much, guys. I'll see you guys in the next video.